wanna stay ahead of the curve, then follow my words. All we do is teach, train, innovate, solve. Yeah. Teach, train, innovate, solve. If you wanna be ahead of the curve, then follow my words.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to TExES, where we build confident, empowered educators through empathy and strategy, giving you practical tools that you can use today. I'm Tamara Gibson. I'm an educator, a trainer, a coach with over 20 years of experience supporting new teachers and classroom educators to make informed instructional decisions. And tonight, I have a quick question for you, because I know that you've seen these Pearson exams and you've looked at these exam questions and you've probably said, all of these could be right, given the right conditions. And that's one of the biggest reasons that Domain 3 questions are challenging. It isn't the lack of knowledge about instructional strategies, it's really knowing which instructional practice best matches the student's needs. And it's based on the evidence that they'll provide you with. And that's exactly what you need to be prepared to do on a daily basis as an educator or a special education specialist. So tonight, I want to simplify that process. Instead of you memorizing all these definitions and these long lists of strategies, I'm going to share my thoughts around 3 and how to think through those as a special education teacher. So by the end of tonight's lesson, you'll know exactly how and when to choose between the 3 common best practices that I'm going to share with you. So essentially, I'm going to show you the why to choose between those common best practices. I'm going to share 3 of them with you that talks about when do I choose them. And then, of course, I'm always going to support those that are preparing for SPED 186 to give you some exam tips and to walk you through a couple of questions to help you to know how to address these particular exam questions. So I want to kind of preference this. I want you to think about why the need for understanding these instructional strategies and knowing when to put them in place is important. And I want to use something practical. We've all been to the doctor, and I know that they write prescriptions, and they have probably thousands or even 100 of medications at their pen, but they have to choose the medication that fits the diagnosis. And to me, that's the way that teaching works. They work in the same way. See, we have evidence-based instructional practices that are in our instructional toolbox, but the student tells us which tool to use. And I say the student tells us that because of the framework that I often talk to you about. And that framework assists us with understanding what the data is, what the student's needs are, and then us choosing the corrective actions. So notice what comes before action. It's the need. You never begin with the strategy itself. You begin with what the student actually needs. Hence, the information that I have before you. But there's something that I left out in this framework that I talk about in great depth when we are preparing for Domain 5, and that is progress monitoring, which leads us to know whether or not what we are prescribing actually works. That's the special education framework. You've got your student data, you've got the student need, and you've got the instructional practice. And then we follow into the progress monitoring. Well, explicit instruction is one of the most researched and common instructional practice that's used in education. And it's the first one that I'm going to share and talk to you about in regards to these 3 frameworks that we're going to go through. Explicit instruction has 4 focuses. And you can find these in the TExES TEKS. Typically, you find them more so in ELA when you're talking about the science of teaching reading. But I read something recently this week that talked about the keys to literacy, and they defined it as a teacher's actions that are clear, unambiguous, direct, and visible. See, explicit instruction isn't simply telling students what to do. Teaching is deliberate, carefully planned, so that nothing is left for chance. Now, we know that there's never a perfect lesson, but utilizing this particular strategy and this method helps us to close the gap. So some characteristics of this is that the teacher explains, they model, they break things into small chunks, they do frequent checks, providing immediate feedback, very important, so that we give lots of opportunity for them to respond. And that there is the heart of explicit instruction. But I want to share a quick note. And that is, I guess, TEA's explicit definition of it. And that is a high leverage, evidence-based practice that benefits many learners. And I'm going to say not just students with learning disabilities. And that's kind of what I stated at the beginning of our chat. But for the purposes of tonight's discussion, I'm going to center it around students with disabilities and their particular needs. And here is where I just toss in an exam tip. If a student doesn't know how, explicit instruction is usually your first choice. And there are really 4 focuses here with explicit instruction. You've got clear objectives where we set expectations, the students know what's going to happen and be prepared to follow along. You've got the teacher modeling, you've got guided practice, and you've got an independent practice, which I will break down and talk a little bit more as we go along tonight with this particular conversation. And then I want to jump right into our next one, which is scaffolding. And scaffolding, it's a strategy that's often confused with explicit instruction, but there is a clear difference because explicit instruction teaches the skill, while scaffolding, as you see from my graphic here, supports the students while they practice the skill. And we go from teaching to supporting to independence. And then I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the differences so that it's very clear to you. In explicit instruction, we got teacher-directed and systematic approach. Both of these practices are evidence-based, while scaffolding really goes into the temporary. I use it typically temporarily so that the student can gain the practice and the knowledge and the deep concept of it. They might not need it anymore after that. While explicit instruction is teaching a new skill directly, I am going to gradually remove scaffolding as I go along. See, sometimes we use these tools, manipulatives like sentence stems and maybe dictionaries, glossaries, and things of that nature that the student might need as support, even cues or prompts or checklists that we could put in place as a scaffolding item, but we're going to gradually remove those. And so that to me is the grandest and the biggest difference between them for us to understand. One is supportive, while the other is a direct way in which we're teaching said subject, said skill, or concept. And going back to scaffolding, I want to state that if the student has some understanding already of the skill or the concept that you're teaching, I'm going to say that you go back and look within the answer choice for ways in which they are scaffolding. They may not use that terminology, but they're definitely going to talk about some of the things that I listed as supports. I gave a few already, but a couple that I want to make sure I put in is vocabulary support using visuals and anchor charts. It might be some of the things that they put in there. And then we have the third one, really four. I've paired guided practice with gradual release because I just believe that they're very effective in helping students to become more independent. And in we do, I do, we do, you do. And often I say we do together or you do alone. But effective teachers really don't stop after modeling. We practice coaching and providing immediate coaching to our students as we go along. And with these two powerhouses linked together, mistakes are often corrected before they become habits. So one of the reoccurring thoughts that I want to refute is that guided practices simply means student practice. Student practice happens during all of our lessons that we present most of the time. So to me, what makes guided practice different is that teacher is still actively coaching while the students are learning. And with this, I want to kind of throw in some clarity around it. When I ride a bike, or I'm learning to ride a bike, or teaching someone to ride a bike, I'm going to explain how to ride it, yes. But I'm not going to hand someone the bike and just say, good luck. No, I hold the seat. I run beside them. I give them prompts. I talk to them. I tell them to keep pedaling. We correct things so that they don't fall. And eventually, I let them go. That, to me, is guided practice with gradual release. To be sure that you understand what guided practice is, it's an instructional phase. And this is where students begin to apply some newly learned skill while you provide them with immediate feedback, prompts, questions, and corrective support. See, the goal is not simply to complete work. Rather, it's building enough accuracy and confidence that the students can eventually perform the task independently. And when we get here, the exam tip that I want to say is that if a student knows the process but lacks confidence, guided practice is often going to be mentioned within those answers. And like I said before, it might not be directly stated, use guided practice, blah, 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 blah. But it is going to be there within your answer choices. And so pointing out the differences between all of the ones that I presented today. Explicit instruction, I'm going to teach the skill. Scaffolding, I'm supporting what the students practice while the student practices the skill. And guided practice strengthens the skill overall. While gradual release supports independence. And all of these strategies, when paired correctly, can do wonders for our students. So when should I choose them? Well, explicit instruction, when our students are learning something new. If they're demonstrating some misconceptions, or maybe they require a lot of teacher guidance, or they're making consistent errors. That's when I use explicit instruction. Scaffolding, however, is when you understand part of the task, but the students can't complete it independently. I want to put some of those tools from my instructional toolbox in play. And then guided practice. This one I want to do a little bit deeper dive because it's going to be mentioned a lot on the SPED 186 exam, because they're going to ask you, has the student learned the skill, but not yet mastered it independently? And if the answer is yes, then guided practice is going to be the best answer. But as you grow stronger in your analysis, you look for clues, they're going to drop a few gems. And it might be things like the student performs well when the teacher is nearby. Maybe accuracy decreases during their independent practice. Or they might say that the student needs reassurance after every step. These are all cues to let you know that you're going to need to do something that talks about guided practice. A few other things. The child might not understand the concept, but make careless. They understand the concept, but they're making careless procedural mistakes. But what I really want you to notice is something important, that the issue isn't understanding anymore. The issue at this point is the independence. So before we go, I want to practice a little bit with you. And in this question, it says a 5th grade student with a learning disability has recently been introduced to identifying the author's purpose. And during classroom discussions, the student is unable to explain the difference between persuade, inform, and entertain without the teacher's assistance. The teacher is planning tomorrow's lesson. Which instructional approach would most effectively address the student's current instructional need? Now, I've given 4 choices here, but I always want you to think back to the framework. What's the data? What's the need? And what action correctly answers the question that they're asking me? So should I say A, provide independent reading practice followed by written reflection? Or B, deliver explicit instruction by modeling how to identify text evidence for each author's purpose while checking for understanding throughout the lesson? Or maybe C, assign the student to work with a peer who has mastered the skill. And finally, D, provide a graphic organizer after the students complete independent practice. And here's where I say again, each of these could be corrective actions to take depending on said data given to you. In this question, the student cannot yet identify author's purpose. The skill has not been mastered, and the teacher must first teach it directly. So if you chose B, you are correct. And then I want to refute D, because I think some of you would probably have chosen D. Well, D, graphic organizers are wonderful, but they only work after a student understands. In this question, they don't understand the skill yet, so that's not going to be a corrective support for them. In our second question, it says a 7th grade student with ADHD accurately solves math problems when working with the teacher, but frequently becomes confused and makes procedural errors when completing assignments independently. Progress monitoring indicates the student understands each step during instruction, but struggles to maintain accuracy after the teacher's support is removed. So which instructional adjustment would most appropriately promote independent performance? Again, same framework. What's the data? What is the need? And what actions correctly answer my question? Well, A says to increase opportunities for guided practice while gradually fading teacher prompts during problem solving. B, begin reteaching the entire lesson using explicit instruction. C, reduce the complexity of assigned problems. Or D, replace grade level assignment with a modified curriculum. Here again, I draw you back to the data. The student understands and performs well with teacher support. So the need or the problem occurs after support disappears. That's the clue. So the correct answer is A. The issue isn't learning. It's learning to be independent here. And that's why I presented the guided practice and gradual release, because it directly addresses this need. As always, I want to thank you for joining us. I am so grateful that you landed on our station. I always want to thank you because you didn't have to sit through this conversation. I hope that by sitting through our conversation, it is helping you to understand this profession. The thing that I love most is being able to share my understanding so that you get closer to achieving your goal, but closer to making sound instructional decisions based on evidence in your classroom every day. Every classroom scenario follows the same thinking process. We have to look at the data that we're being provided, whether we've given data from the beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. We quickly identify the student's need. Whatever that need is, we need to choose the best instructional practice that will address their needs. And I go a little further in sharing about progress monitoring because we're dealing with students with disabilities. This helps us also to attack domain 5 for those that are preparing for the written analysis, because this is exactly what effective special education teachers and teachers, period, do every day. So in tonight's lesson, I hope that I helped to simplify domain 3. I would love it if you would subscribe to our channel and continue to come back as we continue our series on evidence-based instructional practices, because this is what the exam loves to assess. I know it to be true because 27% of the exam is weighted on your understanding of curriculum knowledge and instructional strategies. So they're going to test that information out. But I also want you to join us this week in our school community as I place more examples like I presented tonight for you to practice and ensure that you are ready for the classroom and for your state exam. I also want to invite you to our workshop that we have. It's going to be held on July the 25th. It's a Saturday morning, and it's going to be led by 2 Title I veteran educators. If you combine their years of service together, it's 40. 40 years of them teaching students with disabilities, of writing IEPs and participating in ARDs, which they're still doing today. We've had a great time preparing for you, and I'd love for you to join us on the 25th. And all you really will need to secure your material fee by July the 25th. I'm going to shut it down by 9 a.m., hoping that you will do that way before that time. But I want you to be ready this August. Walk in prepared. I don't want you to hope and pray that things go well. We never know that if you have to start day 1 with writing an IEP. So I hope to see you on July 25th. But until then, I want you to keep studying with purpose. Keep connecting the data to the need, and remember that your certification isn't about this test. It is the key to the classroom where the students are waiting for you to make the right instructional decision. So as always, I'm grateful and thankful for you being here, and I'll see you next time, right here, next Monday at 7 p.m. Good night, everyone.